Hi, I'm Jamie from ESL Teacher 365, and today I'll be talking all about housing options when teaching abroad. I'll share the pros and cons of the different options, and I'll share how to find housing when teaching abroad. Let's get started. When teaching English abroad, you have quite a few different options for housing. There are homestays, private and shared apartments or houses. You might have student housing options, or if you're lucky, you'll have provided accommodation. Let's look at some of the pros of homestays. First of all, it's a great way to learn the language and also experience the culture of the country. You'll usually be eating some of your meals at your homestay, so it's a great way to try different local cuisine. You will also be able to participate in different local traditions, and it's just a great way to meet people as well. I did homestays in Costa Rica as well as Spain, and if you want to learn the language, I highly recommend a homestay. There are some cons to homestays. You'll have a lack of privacy and independence. For example, in Costa Rica, I didn't actually have a key to my house, my host mom did. So if I wanted to leave during the night, I had to knock on the door and wake her up. So I didn't go out that much because I felt really bad about doing that. Of course, that's not every situation, but yes, you are going to be losing a bit of your independence and privacy. Oftentimes the meals are already planned, so you can't really pick and choose what you want to eat. If you do want to eat out at a restaurant, you need to tell your host family ahead of time so they don't prepare food for you and then you're not there. You also might not be allowed to bring visitors. So if you want to bring your friends, or maybe you have a significant other while living abroad, this may not be okay with your host family. And lastly, the language barrier can be exhausting. Of course, you want your house to be a nice, safe spot where you can relax, but if you're constantly having to speak in another language and maybe there's some cultural misunderstandings, it can be very tiring and exhausting. Another option for housing when teaching abroad is a shared apartment or house. This is a way to practice language as well, because you may be living with local people or with a group of international people. Usually they might be around your age, and this is a way to learn the local language or to practice international languages. This is definitely more affordable than living on your own because you're just renting out a room, and it's a great balance between having some privacy in your own private room, but also having that sense of community and always having people where you can go out together and maybe learn a little bit about their cultures and traditions. I have done different shared housing options, and I really enjoyed my time there. Of course, there were some roommate situations that weren't as great as others. I had two roommates who actually fought a lot, and I was kind of in the middle, so that one wasn't the best. But I had another shared house where I absolutely loved my roommates, and we had such a great time together, and we still try and go on trips together. So it really depends on the people more so than the house itself. Some cons, like I mentioned before, is that personalities can clash. This will just depend on who's living there, but in shared houses, often you have people coming and going quite a bit. So maybe you have a good vibe going on, and then someone leaves and someone comes, and it can be a little bit tricky at times. If you're living with locals or internationals, you will still notice that you're going to have some language barrier or some cultural misunderstandings happening if you aren't from the same culture and language. There is a bit of a lack of privacy because you only have your room, which is going to be your area that's just for you. You're often sharing bathrooms, the kitchen, the living room, and you might have some house rules on visitors as well. Let's talk about private apartments and houses. This is of course going to give you the most privacy and a nice place to relax at the end of the day if you are feeling a bit overwhelmed by the language barrier. You won't have to deal with any cultural misunderstandings, which can also lead to less stress. And this is the best option if you are teaching abroad and bringing your partner or your family. If you'd like to learn more about teaching abroad with a family, I do have this video that you can check out next. Some cons are that this is obviously the most expensive option, and it's going to be more difficult to learn the language. If you're practicing at home, you're kind of being forced to almost, then you're going to pick the language up a lot faster. But if you're coming home and you're listening to your podcasts and watching TV in your own language, then you won't be practicing as much. Some other cons are that it can be more difficult to make local friends because you won't have all those connections from your roommates or your homestay. Additionally, some landlords won't want to rent to foreigners, and some of them may even try to take advantage of you and rip you off, so just be careful. Student housing is usually an option when there's a university close by, and this is a great affordable option and another way where you can easily meet people. You may have a dining hall and different facilities as part of your student housing, and this is a great option for foreigners because they're usually set up to be rented by the month and you don't need such a long contract. Some of the cons are that they can be very, very basic small rooms. It's basically like a dorm room. You will have a lack of privacy because the room is so small. You may even be sharing with another person, and there might be some restrictions on visitors as well. Some countries and teach abroad programs actually offer teachers provided accommodation, which means that it's free for you. The rent and sometimes things like utilities and deposits are paid for, so you don't have to worry about that, and oftentimes they are located pretty close to your school. Provided accommodation is a great option if you're trying to save money while teaching abroad, and in some cases you will be getting your own studio apartment, and in other cases you might be sharing an apartment or a house with some of your coworkers. The cons are that not all programs offer free accommodation, and because they're usually a studio apartment, which can be quite small, it's not the best option for couples or families. Often this kind of accommodation is very, very basic, and you might not even be able to hang up anything or really customize it with your own furniture or anything like that. It's kind of just for the teachers during their contract. Now that we've looked at all the options for housing when teaching abroad, which options are the most appealing to you? Leave a comment down below. Now that we know what our options for housing are when teaching abroad, how do we actually find them? Some countries have their own websites or blogs or apps for finding accommodation. An example for Spain is called Idealista. This is usually going to be talking to local people, so it is helpful to know some of the language. Some of these apps and websites do allow you to translate from English into the local language, and some do not. If you don't speak the local language, you can always get someone at your school to help you call the different properties and set up inspections. Another option are TEFL teacher Facebook groups. There are constantly teachers that are coming and going, and so often people will post different rooms or apartments that are available for rent. And because they've been rented to a foreigner before, this means that the landlord is willing to rent to foreigners. This can be a great place to find out about housing as well. You'll see that teachers will also post warnings for different properties or landlords that should not be looked into, so that's a great place to make sure that you're not getting scammed. If there's a university nearby, then you can do a Google search for student housing and set up a tour. For homestays, you can always ask your program if they offer homestays, and if they don't, if there are any sort of volunteering programs in the local area, you may be able to stay at a homestay through them. Once you find out where you're teaching, you can ask your director or a head teacher at your school if they have any contacts for housing. They may have a relative or a friend who's renting out a room or an apartment, so that's a nice way to have a bit of a connection with the housing. If your contract includes free accommodation, make sure to ask all sorts of questions about it. Who pays the deposit? Does it include furniture? What do you have to do to pay the utilities? Ask all of those questions before you sign your contract so everything is clear. I hope this video was helpful to learn a little bit more about housing options when teaching abroad. If you'd like to learn more tips and tricks for teaching abroad and online, you can find me on Instagram at ESLTeacher365. And make sure to check out the description box down below. I have a ton of free resources to help you during your teach abroad journey. If you need any extra help, you can fill out my survey, which is linked down below. If you'd like to learn about some of the best places to teach abroad, then you can watch this video next. Happy teaching!